and please refrain from individual or personal attacks. Councilwoman Gilmore, will you please put Council Bill 1313 on the floor?
Yes, President Clark. I move that Council Bill 1313 be placed upon final consideration and do pass.
Thank you, Councilwoman. It has been moved and seconded. The 30-minute courtesy hearing for Council Bill 1313 is open. Do we have somebody here to do a staff report for this one, or are we just going straight into... I don't see anybody. All right. So since we don't, I'll just read the bill real quick so that everybody who's watching along. 1313 is a bill for an ordinance amending sections 39-121 of the revised municipal code of the City and County of Denver regarding the schedule for use of facilities specifically for the Denver Botanic Gardens. All right. We do have about 10 people, I believe, signed up. So I'm going to call the first 5, if you could come up to this front bench so that you're ready to hop up when I call your name, because the time will start right after I call you. So if you could come up to the front, Brian Voight, I apologize, Brian Loma, Andrea Mosby, John Riecke, and Jaime Perkins, if you can come up, and Brian, you're up first.
Good evening, members of council. My name is Brian Voight. For the last almost 13 years, I've had the great privilege of serving Denver Botanic Gardens. Denver Botanic Gardens is a 501c3 nonprofit institution that has been a partner of the City and County of Denver since 1951. For the last 12 years, we have served 4 core values: diversity, relevance, sustainability, and transformation. Last year, we again connected with over 1.3 million visitors in 1 year, and if people don't visit us, we visit them. Some of the initiatives you may know about are our urban food initiatives, which was actually launched at the Mariposa development, our horticulture outreach program that has now gone statewide, and school programs. We also team with organizations working with underserved communities to provide not only free admission, but also free transportation using shuttle buses on a day devoted just to them. Along with free days, we welcomed around 80,000 free visitors last year. We are asking for your support of an increase in admission rates starting this year because it keeps us on par with where we were 10 years ago when we last adjusted our rates, and it keeps us up, therefore, with inflation. We have multiple cost drivers that have outpaced that inflation. The first is personnel costs. We are champions, along with you, for livable wages, and in 2019 reached $15 per hour minimum, and intend to beat your goals that you just recently set for minimum wages. We also have extremely generous health care benefits that bring significant institutional cost because we are determined not to degrade the benefits for our staff. We have repayments for another 8.5 years on our certificates of participation negotiated with the city 11 years ago. We have costs of repairs and maintenance for which we are responsible. Construction costs have grown dramatically within the city of Denver and around the state. We have utilities, and in the last year we had an additional charge of about $500,000 to upgrade our cybersecurity and IT services after quite a bit of extensive work with the city. We have embarked on an ambitious plan to serve our community with experiences that enlighten and delight, while also leading internationally on projects to preserve endangered plant species, champion genetic diversity, promote sustainable use of water, and coordinate global research on steppe ecosystems. This modest increase in admission rates will continue to help us serve our mission. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Brian Loma.
Good afternoon. I guess I didn't put that down. It's not going to do me much good. One of the reasons it's not going to do me much good is I really had a hard time reading and finding the actual bill so that I could be educated on what the proposed fee rates were, how the change in the facility, like what updates that were being done. It was just really hard to find anything. As a member of the community, though, I find it really hard to get to, use the gardens, to get to use the zoo on a regular basis. There are limited number of free days. They're not very accessible. Often they're hard, they're not on popular time frames when families can go. And so it really burdens the communities to face increasing fees every time they want to go do something in the culture and education sectors of our community. Libraries, gardens, these are supposed to be built and developed for the public good and for the enlightenment and the enrichment of all. And I value that it might be a great tourist revenue generator for the city and county of Denver, but by raising rates and making it more expensive to attend, it reduces that cultural advantage for the lowest of the income in the community. So I guess if you have to add fees, I would like to talk about adding free days as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up, Andrea Mosby. Andrea Mosby. All right, John Riecke.
Hello, my name is John Riecke. I live at 2650 West 13th in Councilwoman Torres' district. I learned about this proposed increase from a recent Denverite article, which mentioned that it was due in part to paying off debt from the building of the parking garage. It was mentioned by a previous speaker that they're still paying off certificates of participation from that being built 10 years ago. They spent $10 million building that piece of infrastructure. And I just want to point out that this is an excellent example, a concrete example with actual numbers of the high cost of free parking. That $10 million that was spent on this parking garage could have gone to any of their programming. It could have gone to some other new facility. It could have gone to professionals that actually are there for the Botanic Gardens mission. All the things that were said earlier by the gentleman who spoke, none of the programs he spoke of involved, free parking for attendees. As far as I'm aware, and I may be wrong in this, the Botanic Gardens itself did not actually need a parking garage. People were still able to get to the garage. They still had attendees showing up every day, which is great. So it was an external cost that was unneeded. If there is a need to raise fees to cover programs, people, and inflation, add fees to the parking. That would also be in line with Denver goals, stated plans, which say that we need to start moving people away from single occupancy vehicle trips or any vehicle trips at all, really. That part of the city is not great to drive through in the first place. We shouldn't be encouraging people to drive there. We should be encouraging them to take the bus, to ride bikes, to find alternative modes to get there. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is Jaime Perkins, and then I'll invite the other five. If you signed up to speak this evening on this issue, if you'd come up to the front bench, you'll be next. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jaime Perkins. I live in District 10, and I'm basically the coolest aunt ever. When any one of my friends comes in from out of town with small kids, I say, meet me at the Botanic Gardens. We're going to the Mordecai Children's Garden, which is actually on top of the very expensive to build parking garage that the previous speaker spoke about. I am all in favor of paying my fair share for this wonderful resource. One of the things that I love most about the Children's Garden is that it weaves sustainability and the importance of sustainability throughout the garden. What I see, however, is that importance of sustainability is not being followed through on in parking that's free. And so when I read also in Denver about the fee for the garden going up, the immediate thing I thought is, well, we must be charging for parking, right? So I looked it up, and parking is free. That's terrible. In a city that has certain goals for sustainability, and in a city that professes to be trying to tackle affordability crises, In a city where our transit is the most expensive in the nation with a $3 fare, I wonder why we're charging everybody who comes in, whether by foot, by bike, by bus, or by car, the same amount, essentially, when we let people park for free. So I would just encourage that if we wanted to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions, transportation is the highest contributor, and personal vehicles are over half of that, that charging for parking and incentivizing the correct behaviors of walking, biking, or taking transit to the gardens would be a wonderful thing. We would increase our public health by decreasing pollution if we can get cars off the street, and by incentivizing active transportation on the way there. And it would be a good way to find some money. I'm fine with an increase in admission, but if we can decrease what that increase is and have people pay their fair share to store their personal property at the garden, I would support that. So I just ask that the council would ask those questions about what people maybe should be paying for their free parking, and if that would be a good way to bring in some money to a resource that I absolutely love in my district. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, Caroline Schomp.
Thank you. My name is Caroline Schomp. I live in the 1100 block of Gaylord Street, immediately adjacent to the gardens. I have the privilege of serving on the Gardens Board of Trustees as a mayoral trustee. And what that means is that the four of us who are mayoral trustees represent the neighborhoods around the gardens. Our stated purpose is to provide the kind of conversation between the gardens and the neighborhoods that's important, especially in what is a landlocked facility. The gardens, in contrast to a lot of other places, has no room to grow, and at the same time, the expenses have grown, the number of people who have come, who use the gardens has grown. As a trustee, I've had the benefit of being able to look at the budgets, and over the couple of years that I've served, I've seen how the expenses have increased. I think it's very important to recognize that when you haven't had an increase in admission fees in 10 years, that there's a disconnect between the amount of money that's in the budget and the expenses that money is required to cover. So what I would say is that from the neighborhood perspective, it was imperative that that garage be built. And the fees will cover much, much more than just the garage. And I think for us to focus just on parking fees is short-sighted, because the gardens is an important scientific facility. It's a neighborhood gathering place, and it draws people from all over the metropolitan area. I think if you looked at the statistics, you would see that it's far more than just the citizens of the city and county of Denver. It's people from Aurora and Littleton and Westminster, and those people are an important part of our community, even though the gardens itself is a facility that is part and parcel of the city and county of Denver. So I would really ask you to consider this rate increase as more than paying off a parking garage.
Thank you. Next up is Jonathan. And Jonathan, I think something went wrong with your last name in here, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself. How about that?
Sure. My name is Jonathan Patelco. I live in District 3, Jaime Perkins district, and good evening. I've learned that a portion of this increase, as mentioned before, is designed to fund the Gardens parking garage, which, as we've said, remains free for use for drivers to this day. As an organization receiving support from Denver's Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, the Botanic Garden should facilitate the priorities of the city. For decades, they've accomplished this missive by connecting locals and visitors alike to the variety of plants found in the Rocky Mountain region. Today, their research and prairie restoration efforts have drawn international attention, further demonstrating how the organization benefits our city and state. I expect no less success in their future, so I would not want to see our city bar them from receiving the funding they need to continue performing at a level of excellence. That said, as a municipally supported organization, it is important that the funding we provide reflects the priorities of this city. We declared in Denver's 2040 comprehensive plan that we would support those who choose to walk, bike, and bus in this city. In advancing this price increase, which is charged to all garden visitors regardless of how they arrive, we are punishing those who choose to match the city's goals. We would then use those funds to encourage Denver's car dependence by continuing to ensure it is always less expensive to park your vehicle than it is to ride a bus. The garden should continue receiving backing for their efforts, and the fairest mechanism for doing this is obvious. As in any business, charge customers for the services they use. In this case, charge drivers for borrowing space to store their vehicles, and don't charge customers who don't have a vehicle to store. Local residents have claimed that the garden's parking must be free so that visitors do not park on nearby streets. I am a homeowner myself, yet I personally believe this argument has no merit, because I know the parking in front of my house is owned and maintained by all city residents, not just by me. However, if we insist on cordoning off public land for private use by nearby residents, there are other, fairer methods for accomplishing this. We could meter the spaces during park operating hours to ensure it is temporary and paid for. Or we could place bounds on how long anyone can park in a spot, and locals could purchase paid permits to afford them longer parking terms, formalizing their ownership of the space. In each of these cases, those who use a service are those who pay for that service. Raising ticket prices at the gardens may be necessary now. It may be necessary in the future, but free parking is not one of those reasons it should be raised for. We should always begin by charging special interests for their interests. So before I could support raising these ticket prices, I'd want to be sure that our parking is being paid for. Charging multimodal travelers to support free services for drivers is unjust and flies in the face of our city's aims for 2040. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Steve Lang.
Thank you. My name is, sorry, I'm still having a little cold. My name is Steve Lang. I live in the 1100 block of Gaylord, and I've lived there since 1975. I think it's fair to say that the neighborhood and the gardens have not always been great neighbors. We've had lots of disputes with the gardens on various issues, and one of them was parking. As the gardens grew its attendance, more people came, it became a worse problem all the time. The gardens presented to the neighbors a huge battleship-style parking garage that we said was brutalist and didn't fit the neighborhood at all, and we turned it down. They came back a few years later with the current design, and after much negotiation, the neighborhood agreed that this facility should be built on the condition that the parking be free, because if the parking was paid, it would encourage people to not use the parking garage, and they would be the parking problem would persist. So on those conditions, we approved it, and we've had a great relationship with the gardens over the past decade, and we hope to maintain it. I support the fee increase, which is less than the cost of inflation since the last fees were put in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Kimberly Morse.
I'd like to start by telling you a story about my neighbors.
I'm sorry, could you quick introduce yourself?
Kimberly Morse, Denver, District 10 resident. So I'm going to tell you a story about my neighbors, a hard-working family made up of a single father, his 2 school-aged daughters, and his mother. 3 generations living together and trying to get by. The father has a steady job working on construction projects in the city. He creatively finds ways to do a little extra for his mom and his daughters, despite not making all that much money at his back-breaking job. He doesn't have the spare dollars to take his family to the Botanic Gardens, despite the fact that he's contributed many dollars to make it a vibrant space. Like my neighbor, all of us Denver residents have paid a great sum of money to invest in the maintenance and expansion of the Denver Botanic Gardens. We've done so through SCFD tax on every $10 spent in the city, for which DBG is a tier 1 of 5 tier 1 organizations who receives dollars from SCFD. And we've done so through hundreds of thousands of dollars in the last 2 bond cycles within the last 2 years. Every Denver resident is paying for this facility, but many will never be able to visit because they cannot afford even the current entry fee. I love the fact that the Gardens has tried to make things possible for people who don't make a lot of money. The reality is, if you don't make a living wage in the city and you have to work during the week and you don't get paid time off, or maybe you don't get vacation time, you're not going on the free day. So I appreciate the costs have gone up, and I appreciate what a lot of people have said, but I am very concerned that this public institution that's paid for by the Denver public is becoming increasingly inaccessible, just like so much of the city is to current residents. I want to tell you, in case you don't know, San Francisco and Chicago both offer access to their Botanic Gardens to residents free of charge. I'm not suggesting today that we do that. I am suggesting you be very thoughtful in your consideration of this request, because raising those fees makes it increasingly out of reach for the people who live here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Jesse Paris.
Good evening, members of council, members of the audience, those watching at home. My name is Jesse Sean Paris. I ran for city council at large last year, got almost 15,000 votes with no money. And I'm representing for Denver Homicide Loud, Black Star Action Movement for Self-Defense, Positive Action Commitment for Social Change, as well as the Unity Party of Colorado, Universal African Peoples Organization Denver Chapter, and Mile High News. And I'll be running to be your next mayor in 2023. As my colleagues have already stated, you keep raising the rates on all of these things. We have the highest rates for the bus, public transit in the city. The wages are not keeping up with the cost of living, but yet you want to encourage Denver natives and residents to attend the Botanic Gardens. I myself have only been to the Botanic Gardens a few times, and that was when I was a child, and that was because it was by a field trip. But after that, it's too expensive to even go to any of these functions. At least the zoo offers free zoo days. At least the art museum offers free art days. But the Botanic Gardens, for some reason, doesn't offer any free days. And then you're talking about you want to increase the rates. And then there's free parking, but yet you want to maintain this comprehensive 2040 plan, which is going against what you agreed when you passed this plan, that you were going to encourage more multimodal modes of transportation to get to and from work, to get to and from school, to get to and from work and play. You are not doing that. You are just continuously raising the fees, just like the rents are being raised in the city. This has become the mile-high income city. You have to have mile-high income. And I guess you have to have mile-high income to even have a good time in the city, because the rates just keep going up, but the wages are not keeping up. And by 2023, we're supposed to be making minimum wage is supposed to be almost $16 an hour. You have to make $25 an hour to even afford a one-bedroom in Denver. So I would like all members of this council to think about all of that before you pass this. But we already know you're going to pass it because it's already been made up before you come into the chambers. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our speakers on this item this evening. Are there questions from members of council? Councilwoman Knietch.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask if Brian Voight would come up, please. I first wanted to ask if you can just answer some questions, clarify the record a little bit about free days, what days of the week they tend to be, and whether you are considering adding more weekend days, things like that. And then also, free days are not the only way that folks go to the gardens at free and reduced price. So can you talk about the other programs you have that and what the usage numbers are, if you by any chance have them, for the other ways that low-income families or children get to access the gardens?
You bet. I appreciate the question. A couple of things. We have free days throughout the year. We try to make sure that we cover all 4 seasons so that we don't just throw them into the winter. We actually have free days during the summer. We try to emphasize things like Earth Day, things that are kind of brand specific to us, as well as weekends that we have throughout the year. I'm not sure exactly the number of free days that we have scheduled for 2020, but as I said earlier, we go a step further and actually work with organizations that serve underserved communities and provide their own free day and shuttle services throughout the day. So we will actually rotate the shuttle back and forth throughout the whole day. We're the only organization, I think, that does this. And we work with our docents and our staff to make sure that we give them a really rich experience at absolutely no charge for any of it. Last year, the total number of free participants we had at the Gardens topped 80,000, which is an extraordinary number. And so we're trying to be as creative as possible. In fact, today we had an Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility Committee meeting of the board talking about other ways that we can, if people can't come to us, we can go to them with our services and our programming.
Great. If I may ask a follow-up question, I am looking at your free days. It looks like there's like about 8 of them. Does that look right for 2020? And you have several different locations. I do notice that there's only 2 Sundays out of your 3 locations. They each have 8 days, but 2 of the entire list is on Sundays and no Saturdays. Is that something you'd be willing to take back to the board in terms of expanding access to free days on weekends when people who are working are, at this point, working people work every day of the week? It's true. But the potential to have some balance, at least when folks are out of school, perhaps, or increasing the number of Saturdays that could be considered?
Yeah.
Because I am sensitive to that concern.
I am too, and I think we can absolutely do that. We can look at adding some weekends. Part of the challenge that we have is on weekend days during the summer, for example, we've had as high as 16,000 people show up on a free day. And that's just a bad experience for everybody. You can barely move within the Gardens. It's just so packed. So trying to balance out how we make free days an actual enjoyable experience. It's one of the reasons when we started our shuttle program, we thought, let's just bring shuttles to free days. And then we realized we don't actually need more people on a free day. We need to give them their own free day so they can have a really high quality experience. And for a number of our events, we've actually capped admissions so that the experiences are good. But we will absolutely look at having more on weekends, maybe in the fall and the spring in particular.
Yeah, and there's none at Chatfield or the other locations. Just one last question on this topic, which is about the school children. So are there some programs for DPS students to be able to access the Gardens for free? And can you just educate folks on those programs?
Oh, absolutely. We're involved in a number of free school children programs. We are part of the 5x5 program. I think you have a list of all the ways that we provide programming for school kids. There's tens of thousands of kids that receive free services from us. And we're also looking at more and more bus reimbursements and that kind of thing, so it becomes free for the schools themselves. And we, again, work with school districts over the entire kind of front range of Colorado that bring kids in. It's not just the city of Denver. And if I could just add one other thing, accessibility is really critical to us. Looking at alternatives to mobility is really critical to us. When the bike share program started, we were not on the map, and we insisted that we have a station at Denver Botanic Gardens. We opened up our Cheeseman Gate so that people that could walk in had an easier way of getting into the gardens. Just in the last year, the nonprofit paid for a Hawk light system at 11th and York so that people could more safely cross over as they came toward us. This is a really complicated, big issue, but what goes in my mind are there are people that live out in Aurora and in Englewood and in Jefferson County that have strollers and kids, and I don't know, with the current mass transit system we think we have in Metro Denver, I don't know how they get to us any other way than driving. And if they are looking at paying a fee for parking or just parking for free on a street, it's hard to put charged parking in the middle of a sea of free parking and expect that people are going to choose the paid parking. Downtown, it's different. You're surrounded by meters, and you have paid parking lots in the middle. People then have to make a decision about how they want to pay for parking. But we have a very different situation, much like the zoo in DMNS and others that are in the middle of neighborhoods.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Black.
I have the pleasure of getting a presentation from you every year. I'm in my role on the SCFD board, so a couple of questions related to what I've learned about that. You just mentioned people coming from other cities and other counties. Can you tell us about what percentage of your guests actually come from a different county?
Boy, it's kind of hard to break that all down. My guess is, I'm trying to think of the last report that we gave to SCFD, and we haven't done it for 2019 yet. But by far the largest county of our attendance is the city and county of Denver. But it's not a majority. The majority are people that come from the other 6 counties within the SCFD district. And then we bring in an enormous number of people from outside of the region that come in here as tourists.
Yes, and I remember also that people come from out of state. I mean, it's one of the finest gardens in the country. And so, as you mentioned a moment ago, it would be very unlikely for people to travel on our public transportation from faraway suburbs or Colorado Springs or Wyoming. And so, you know, with the neighbors' concerns and the public transit that we have, it really is important at this moment that we do have parking. So I recognize that. Several of the speakers mentioned that they read in Denver Right that you were asking for the increase in order to pay off the parking debt. Is that what the money is being used for?
No, I was expressing to the reporter all of the ways that we've seen cost pressures over the last. We probably should have been here 5 years ago asking for an increase in our rates. We've been really intense over the last 10 years, and we finally hit a point where we've kind of plateaued on a lot of our capacities. And at the same time, we've had these big cost pressures come up, and I listed a whole bunch of them. I don't really know why the parking COPs got highlighted, but like I said earlier, our biggest cost pressure in the last year has been IT security and cybersecurity. It was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you can't avoid spending that money. We also put as a very high premium the well-being of our staff. We have 266 FTEs that we're responsible for, and that's about 300 souls every summer at our peak. And we give them great benefits. We contribute mightily to 403Bs. We've raised our opening wage to a level that exceeds the Denver goalpost that you have just recently said. So we've had a lot of cost pressures. Paying off the COP is a burden, but it's a burden that we're more than halfway through right now. But it's definitely part of the mix, but it's just a part of the mix.
Yeah. And one of the things I was most impressed with that you mentioned tonight and I learned about earlier were those kind of field trips that you guys fund. I know you have a lot of seniors coming, and you go to senior residences and pick up people who, you know, may have memory issues or they're living in homes. You pay for the transportation and you let them in there free. And those are just one of the groups of those 80,000 free tickets you give away every year. Who are some of the other groups that are participate in that?
We actually launched it with a combination of Westwood and the Asian Pacific Center, which works with Asian refugees, and they're situated in one of our board members' districts, Senator Rhonda Fields, who's in North Aurora. We have worked with, thank you, but now I can't see because I don't have my glasses on. Some other really interesting ones, the African Leadership Group, which works with African refugees and immigrants all over the region. We have an amazing partnership with them, and that's another free opportunity. For the 3 of the last 4 years, we have hosted their Afric Impact conference at no charge. And we do that a lot with different community organizations. We want to make sure that they have a home where they can use our facilities. We're about to open a brand new library, by the way, in our new building that will be publicly accessible and paid for through our projects. We have, thank you. I used to be able to see better. Let me see. East High School, environmental learning for kids. Girls Inc., History Colorado Center, Hope Communities, Hunger Free Colorado, Journey Families, La Alma Recreational Center, Latino Parents of Academia, Ana Maria Sandoval Elementary, Lighthouse Writers Workshop, Mental Health Center of Denver, Mexican Cultural Center, Museo de los Americanos. There's just a wonderful, rich number here, and it's, again, it's something where I hope you're proud of the fact that your gardens has taken IDEA principles so powerfully to our mission. And it's something where Denver Botanic Gardens is now a leader throughout the country on inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility issues. And we know we're not even close to finished yet, but we are making tremendous progress because, as one of our past chairs said, we want this to be a garden for all people. And if there are barriers, we want to break them. And I would love to work with some of the people behind me on opening up doors so that we can provide more free opportunities for people in need that they serve. I think I'd love for them to contact me so that we can do that. We want to be a garden for all people.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Hinds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Director Vogt, thank you for coming. I think it's pretty clear that that you have a great institution and you take care of your employees. I think there are actually a couple opportunities for you to toot your own horn that you haven't had yet. Your fees are actually on the low end relative to other SEFD institutions, is that right?
Yes.
Your employees now consult around the world, is that correct?
They do. We actually have a couple of areas of specialty. The main ones are genetic diversity, and the other is studying steppe plants from fellow steppe ecosystems that are low water using plants that can translate to a more sustainable environment for all of us.
And thank you for helping with the planet too. So, and then people from around the world come to the Botanic Gardens to do research too, is that correct?
They do, and with our new laboratories we're about to open up, that will increase. In fact, the Center for Plant Conservation is holding their annual conference at our facilities in May this year.
And you're now the #1 or #2 gardens attraction in the nation, is that correct?
We are.
And I heard you mention a laboratory. Did I mishear you also installing a library? Or are you doing a laboratory and a library?
Laboratory and a library in our new center, and in fact, the library will be on the main floor of the center, which will be accessible to the public at no charge. So you'll be able to come in and study and work with master gardeners and not pay any admission at all.
And so the Denverite article, which I have in front of me, it says the increase in operating costs is primarily due to payments on the garden's new parking garage. Are you saying that that is an incorrect statement?
That's incorrect. Primary should not have been the word.
Okay. And then it also quotes you as saying you can't really get a lot of donors for parking structure.
That is absolutely true.
Fair enough.
You know, when we launched our master development plan that we will complete in June of this year is a $115 million investment. The parking structure was an area where not a lot of people want their name on a parking structure. They'd like to have their name on a garden. So raising money for that was untenable. And in fact, just like DMNS and the zoo, their parking structures, which are free, are paid for with certificates of participation. So we negotiated with the city about using the city's good credit so long as we were on the absolute obligation to pay that money back through our operating funds.
And a previous commenter mentioned that a parking garage was an unneeded extra cost. Do you believe that a parking garage was needed?
Our parking lot, it was not a parking garage before, was about less than 1/3 of the capacity we currently have, and it was absolutely not adequate.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple questions for Ms. Perkins, if she's willing to come to the...
Hi.
Hi. Ms. Perkins, you live in District 10, is that right?
I do. I live in Cap Hill.
And the average age of Capitol Hill is 31.4. Would you say that you represent that average age?
I'm 30.
Do you have a car?
No.
When you said you take your nieces to the Botanic Gardens, how do you get to the Botanic Gardens?
I walk or I most likely ride my bike. Sometimes I'll grab a scooter, which is about $2.30 from my place to the garden.
Okay, thank you. Yep, thank you very much. No further questions.
Thank you, Councilman Hinds. That might have been the most creative way I've ever heard someone ask about someone's age. Councilman Flynn.
I'm sorry, did you call me?
Yeah, you're up, Councilman Flynn.
Yeah, I didn't hear that over the uproarious laughter. Excuse me. I'd like to bring out one thing that hasn't been discussed yet, and I see Fred is still here. And we discussed this by email over the past week, but I just want members to be aware that this bill also deletes the city's setting of rental rates at the Chatfield facility. And I was curious about why that never came up in committee and why we weren't being told about that. But maybe, Fred, could you come up, and Brian, maybe you could also help explain that the city is no longer in the middle of the relationship in the land lease with the Army Corps of Engineers and some such. But I just want, before people vote, we should know that we're eliminating our ability to set rates at Chatfield.
Sure. Thank you. Fred Weiss, Director of Finance Administration for Parks and Recreation. The city entered into an agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers. I actually looked it up today, in August of 1975. We don't know exactly, no one is around who was around back then, to know exactly why the Army Corps wanted the city to be on the other side of that lease, because from day one, it was for the purpose of the Chatfield Arboretum. Mm-hmm. Needless to say, we entered into the agreement. The Botanic Gardens has operated the Chatfield Arboretum since that time, and the city has had little to no involvement in that facility. Because it was a city facility, fees were set by council. But in our discussions with the Botanic Gardens over the last year or so, it was determined it didn't make sense for the city to be in the middle of that relationship anymore, and the Army actually thought the same thing. And so they said, okay, why don't we just contract directly with the Botanic Gardens for the occupancy of that property, and which is what we executed. We terminated our agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Botanic Gardens entered into an agreement directly with the Army Corps of Engineers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sending those to me. Brian, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, what the reasoning behind it is, but what other facilities does the association operate? I know that there's out on in Jefferson County, McIntyre.
We actually have
Mount Goliath.
4 facilities. Our oldest is Mount Goliath, which we operate in a contract with the Forest Service. It's near the top of Mount Evans. It's about a 100-acre site. Mm-hmm. Then we have Chatfield Farms, which hit in the mid-'70s. That also includes the little bit of open space on the north side of C-470, and then a strip that runs down Wadsworth. And then we have a contract with and that's the contract we have with the Army Corps of Engineers. And then we have a contract with the City of Aurora to manage the programming at the Plains Conservation Center.
Oh, okay.
And we've done that for about 5 years now.
Thank you. And the City of Denver has nothing to do with any of those other facilities other than Chatfield, which we're now turning back.
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. That's all. I just wanted folks to be aware of that.
Thank you, Councilman. All right, seeing no other questions, the public hearing for Council Bill 1313 is closed. Are there comments by members of council? Councilman Hinds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that it's pretty. I think it's safe to say that the Botanic Gardens is a great institution. I think that it is a strong institution. It's a beacon of what we can do as a city and a region. I think that it's also clear to say that they're great with their employees as well. So I like that if our taxpayers' dollars are going to an institution, that they are taking care of their people, because that means the taxpayers of Denver are taking care of their people. So here's where I start to get concerned. My top priority, as I talked with people, is making sure that people have viable alternatives to cars. And the Botanic Gardens are in Denver's District 10. They are pretty much in the center of District 10, and the majority of the District 10 residents don't drive to the Botanic Gardens. We are in District 10. We're taking the lead in doing and moving beyond cars. Uptown has the highest percentage of people who commute by non-car transit, as in 51%. Cap Hill is close behind at 49%. As I mentioned, the average age of Cap Hill is 31.4. The average age of District 10 is 36.7. So Mr. Lang has lived in his house longer than the average District 10 resident has been alive. And I think that's, and it's nothing against, Mr. Lang or Ms. Schomp. It's that where we are here as a city is we're at an inflection point. And I believe we need to move beyond single occupant vehicles. I think it's good for the planet, it's good for health, physical health, and it's good for community. And so I don't like that we are continuing to make it easy to drive by having parking be free and penalizing the people who do choose to take non-car transit. Sure, non-car transit is not easy until it is. And the best way for us, there will be some pain for a while while we make this conversion, but now is the right time to do the conversion. And now I think this is a good place for us to make that the statement. I'm not against increased funding for the Botanic Gardens. I'm certainly in favor of who they are and what they do. And we as a body are bound to either say yes or no to this contract. If the option was, should we charge parking fees? This would be an easy thing. If we could propose an amendment and say instead of raising the overall fees, let's add a parking fee, I would be totally in favor of that too. But that is not within our power. And so, if something were to pop up next week that were either of those, I would totally vote in favor of it. But I cannot, for my constituents who want to move beyond cars and for myself, vote for an opportunity to make sure that we put our guiding documents that say we're going to prioritize pedestrians first, then bikes, then buses, and at the very last, cars. So I want to thank you so much for all you do, Director Vogt and everyone from the Botanic Gardens and from Parks and Rec, for that matter. It is not an indication against you. It is, I believe that you have a strong place here in the city and in the region. I think that cars don't have a place long term. It's just not the direction that District 10 wants to go. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Oh, I thought I saw somebody else, but I don't anymore. So, okay. Seeing no other comments, I will add a few things. First of all, the Botanic Gardens is just an amazing, phenomenal resource for our community. I was just there recently and just blown away. One of the other things that I always notice when I'm at the Botanic Gardens is how good you guys are at raising money, even compared to other tier 1 SCFDs, not to say anything bad about them, but it's amazing how much you are able to offset the cost of having a world-class facility like that for our residents through private dollars. I think, in fact, I've said to other tier 1s when I've met with them, hey, are you looking at what the Botanic Gardens is doing from a fundraising standpoint? Because it's phenomenal. And as somebody who's got a degree in nonprofit management, spent my entire life before I tripped and fell and ended up here somehow in the nonprofit sector, it's amazing. And I think that work is not celebrated enough and talked about enough. And really, honestly, the fact that you have not come back for a rate increase in 10 years, what else? Let's take a little time capsule. What else can you go back 10 years in this city and cost the same? Because I know most people's homes that they live in have more than doubled in that amount of time. That's a testament to what good stewards you are, not just of our planet, our plants, but of our dollars. And I think that you do a phenomenal job. I love my colleague, Councilman Hinds, one of my favorite guys, and I love that from day one, first thing out of his mouth on this dais on his first night was save the planet, climate change. Love it. And I don't disagree at all with what he's saying about needing to break up with single occupancy vehicles. But we have some really hard and really unpopular decisions that we need to be making if we're serious about that commitment. And I know that this guy is going to be leading us in doing those things. So I'm not saying that he's not there. Whether we can all get there is a better question. But we're not going to solve that problem here. I don't believe this is the place to take a stand on that, because for my constituents, the ones who literally have to take their life into their own hands to ride a bike, live too far away to walk, are working 2 jobs and to get enough time when they've saved up the money or when there's a free day to get to those gardens. They're the ones who live on the opposite side of that inverted L that we talk about from where this facility is. And so I believe that the impact here of increasing the cost of parking before we have done what we need to do, which is double down and triple down on building bike infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure and safe crossings to get to these places, will only create a bigger burden and more barriers for people, for low-income folks, for folks in my district who live on the wrong side of I-25 to get there safely. And we haven't made those commitments. We're working on it. We're trying, but these are massive commitments that we need to make. And until we can create a safe way to get there, to work and to school and to the grocery store, to the things that necessitate that I now have a car in my life and that's how I get around, until we can build that network, I think this is the wrong place to say this is where we're going to make a stand and change. Nobody's going to decide not to have a single occupancy vehicle because of, well, now it was too hard to get to the Botanic Gardens. And unfortunately, a lot of the people, not everyone, but a lot of the people who can walk to the gardens are not the low-income folks who have those barriers to get there. And there is not a safe way to be on a bike from the west side of my district to the Botanic Gardens without, especially with your kids. You know, I've done it to get to Ruby Hill, to a great free cultural facility, and it's scary and it's dangerous. And so I don't believe that this is the place that tonight here, after 10 years of not raising rates, after all the phenomenal work that you guys have done, and the fact that you built, I know, parking garage, dirty word, you built a coolest parking garage ever, with a garden on top that my kids literally, adore. I don't think this is the time or the place to take that stand. So I'm very happy tonight to be supportive of this. I think you have supported our community in so many ways, and this is a very modest and reasonable ask that honestly is probably the easiest ask that we get on fees from places that charge fees. So I am happy to support this tonight, and we'll be doing that in a second. Madam Secretary, roll call.
Black?
Aye.
Cedabaka? Flynn?
Aye.
Gilmore?
Aye.
Herndon?
Aye.
Hinds?
No.
Cashman? Aye. Knietch?
Aye.
Ortega?
Aye.
Sandoval?
Aye.
Sawyer?
Aye.
Mr. President.
Aye. Madam Secretary, please close the voting and announce the results.
10 ayes, 1 nay.
10 ayes, 1 nay. Council Bill 1313 has passed. On Monday, February 3rd, Council will hold a required public hearing on Council Bill 19-1361, changing the zoning classification of 4338 Lopan Street, and a required public hearing on Council Bill 19-1363, changing the zoning classification for 7111, 7101, and 7125 Tower Road in DIA. Any protests against Council Bill 19-1361 or Council Bill 19-1363 must be filed with the council offices no later than noon on Monday, January 27th. Seeing no other business in front of this body, this meeting is adjourned.